Hello, and thank you for joining BlueHornet's 2014 Consumer Views of Email Marketing webinar series. My name is Julie Graham, and I'm in marketing here at Blue Hornet. Blue Hornet is an enterprise email service provider that gives over 2,200 clients the freedom to reach their greatest potential with our combination of global expertise and innovative technology. Just a few webinar housekeeping items before we get started. Please submit any questions you have throughout the presentation by using your chat window. We will be sure to answer all of the questions at the end. This webinar is being recorded, and we will send out the recording and slide presentation in the next coming days. So let's get started. For the third consecutive year, Blue Hornet has surveyed over 1,000 consumers across the U.S. to better understand their behavior and sentiment about email marketing. In today's first webinar in our series of 6, Kara Trivunovic, Blue Hornet's VP of Strategic Services, will be providing an overview of survey findings and year-over-year trends, such as when and where consumers read emails, the email frequency they expect, purchasing behavior, email on mobile devices, and the use of social media and text messaging. Kara is a driving force for developing strategic direction and client plans rooted in industry and client data. Prior to joining Blue Hornet, Kara served as the VP of Marketing Services for StrongMail and was founder and principal of the Email Advisor. Kara has become a fixture at email, digital, and direct marketing events and in industry publications nationwide. Welcome to Kara.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you all for joining us today. As Julie said, this is a survey that the Blue Hornet family has been conducting over the course of the last 3 years, largely because it's important to be able to truly understand, the difference or where the delta is between what consumers say about what they think about the channel and how they actually respond to the channel. And so we partnered up with Flagship to survey a panel of over 1,300 consumers across the U.S., ranging in ages from 18 to 75, to really understand, what it is that they think and believe about the email space, and then ultimately, what is it that we can do, and how do we internalize that information to really address their use of the channel. As Julie said, we really wanted to cover off on some key categories of information, including really understanding habits. And it is important. A lot of times we take for granted that there is a habitual component to how people engage with their phones and with email and a number of other things. And so really wanted to spend some time looking at the habitual side of this. And then talk a bit about preferences around frequency and message relevance. There's a lot of conjecture in the space right now about, is it a less is more approach, or is more when it comes to sending email, and is it really, a shotgun approach better, or is, something more targeted a better solution? And so really wanted to dive into what it is around frequency and messaging relevance that, kind of it resonates with the consumer. Then looking at the influence email has on purchasing behavior. This is something that, we've been talking about for quite some time. Email is typically a channel that is valued from a revenue perspective, but very rarely is looked at as, a driver of incremental behavior, and or, maybe we don't look at it that way, but there's always the desire that it's creating, that sense of incrementality. And so really understanding how consumers view email as an indicator of, driving purchase. Next, we wanted to look at email and mobile, something that we've been talking about for quite some time. This is, really kind of, the paramount of what's happening in the space right now. Every email is mobile in essence, and we really need to be able to understand how consumers engage with that. And then finally looking at this bit of an intersection between email, social, mobile, text, really kind of understanding how they all come together, how consumers are leveraging them, and ultimately what we can be doing with them as channels to leverage. All right, so like I said, we really wanted to start off with the habits side of this, and just for timing purposes, we'll be covering this topic in more detail on our September 9th webinar. But wanted to kind of provide the preliminary high-level look at what we found from a habits perspective. And so, when you think about it as a marketer, when you look at your email program, you're typically considering things like relevance or frequency, maybe brand awareness and loyalty, or even the source of the data as a major influencer of your program's success. But another really important consideration is habit. Consumers have developed habitual behavior when it comes to how and when and where they engage with the email from brands that they're getting. And understanding that the likelihood of a consumer seeing and engaging with your email is only partly, related to the relevance or the timing of the message that you're sending, but really is large in part to what are their habits about how they engage with their email communication. And as a brand, a lot of brands have the opportunity to help encourage the habits that consumers drive or associate with their email communications. Years ago, Southwest Airlines actually had a program that they put in place because they wanted to create a habit with their consumers or with their recipients to open their email communications. And so they actually embarked on, I think it was a 30-day effort that included a lot of messaging and highlighting around including or adding an entry into a sweepstakes if a consumer opened their email. And for every email you opened, you had an entry into the sweepstakes, and they very specifically defined it, that it meant opening the email and turning the images on. And, by doing that and encouraging that behavior over the course of 30 days, it created a habit for their consumers or the recipients of their email communication, and they were able to sustain that open behavior beyond the program because they actually, took it far enough that it encouraged the habit. So as we look at habits, there's a number of considerations around that. And one that you might not consider as habitual but really, really is around which email address a customer gives you at the point they subscribe. So according to the survey, between a personal and business email accounts, the average consumer has over 5 different email addresses. And each one of them carry a different level of importance to the consumer. So when a consumer is presented with this opportunity to provide you as the marketer their email address, there's a series of considerations that they go through to determine which email address is the right email address to give to which brand in a given situation at any moment in time. And, it's not uncommon for consumers to have a throwaway email address that they only check periodically, they don't use for important email communications. And a lot of times the consumer doesn't even really recognize the fact that it's a throwaway. It's just a cognizant decision that they make to say, oh, this is, for an email like this or for a brand like this, I'm going to give them, a different email address. And, as you think about that, it's important to understand that just because you've gotten a subscription from a customer doesn't mean that they've given you access to them in their primary, inbox of interaction. I think about it, and I'll tell you, so I don't have, 5 email addresses. I have 3. One of them definitely is a throwaway, and it's my cable account. So, if any marketers have my cable account, I know that, again, behavior and habit is different with that. I check that account once a month, and I always check it from a desktop or a laptop computer because I don't even deem it important enough to link to my iPhone. So, there is this line of demarcation that happens in how consumers consider and interact and engage with what tier of email address that they have provided. And so, you can't know this, right? It's very difficult to understand, how many email addresses your subscriber has. They've given you a single email address. But, by looking at how, certain domains potentially perform inside of your environment, it can give you an idea of, if you have a high number of customers that are giving you, let's say, Comcast accounts, Comcast addresses that aren't engaging at a high engagement rate, it's possible that that's a throwaway account. Now, that's not the only consideration, so let's not blame lack of engagement on the fact that a consumer is giving you a throwaway account, right? And there's still other aspects associated with driving that engagement. But it is definitely something to take into consideration and can really kind of put the analysis that you're doing on your program in a little different light. So another component of the consumer email habit is relative to where the email is checked. So this one, I always get asked, when we're looking at these results, was there anything that, struck you odd or you found interesting as you were going through the results? And the initial look at this data on consumer habits around where they're checking email actually kind of caught me off guard. When we were asking this customer base where they first checked their email, only 35% of them responded on a smartphone or a tablet, which was really kind of surprising and goes against every piece of data that we have when we're looking at the actual behavior of the customer. So on the surface, the information really didn't echo what we were seeing from a behavioral perspective. I mean, we have some clients who see 80+ % open activity happening on a mobile device. We see consistently above 50% definitively. So we wanted to dive a little deeper into this data to get a good understanding of why there was this discrepancy. And what we found was the biggest indicator of where they were opening their email had to do with age. And so, we were, as you look at this, over, nearly 60% of the 18 to 34 age range opens their email on a smartphone, and that better aligns with, what we see from an engagement perspective across our customer base. So I think the big takeaway here is that as you're looking at or thinking about, how you approach mobile with your program, taking into consideration the demographic and the age of your customer base is really important, because if you're targeting an audience that's in the 46 to 65 year age range, chances are they're probably not going to be opening very heavily on a mobile device, and so maybe those mobile strategies are less important than other approaches you might consider. But if you do weight heavily, in a younger age demographic in the 18 to 34 range, then it clearly is an important aspect of looking at the program. The other thing that I would say about this, and unrelated to the survey and the email habits, but really important when you start considering how you look at and analyze data. This is a prime example of where the first kind of blush at the data didn't make a whole lot of sense. And so it is always helpful to dive a level deeper to really kind of understand what is happening. Are there other influencers to what you're seeing and how things are performing? And like I said, this is a pretty clear indicator of that being the case. All right. So next we're going to look at the frequency and relevancy feedback that we got from this survey. So again, just from a timing perspective, Chapter 2, we'll be doing the deeper dive on email frequency and relevancy, I think around September 24th. So we'll be covering off on that and really diving a layer deeper again into this conversation. But for now, we want to kind of highlight and bubble up what we're finding from consumers. So frequency is really a common topic of conversation and can sometimes turn into a pretty heated debate inside of a lot of organizations. It's not uncommon for the email marketing manager or your email team to get defensive of your list, right? I mean, you don't want to oversend, you don't want to annoy or irritate, and you want to make sure that you're delivering the best experience via the channel that you can. But because email is such an effective channel and we see such high ROI, the management teams tend to feel like, well, the more we put in the top of the funnel, the more comes out the bottom. And so, there's this push me, pull me situation that starts happening inside of organizations where the email team wants to send less and management wants to send more. And, quite honestly, I've seen it work, to a brand's benefit and to their detriment, in either situation. And so, there are some brands that, have a very loyal customer base that will actually, respond well to increased frequency on messaging. There are others, though, that don't. And so as you look at this from an actual applicative perspective and actually putting this to work for you, it's something that you absolutely have to test into. But it's also important to really kind of keep in mind what the experience is of the consumer or your subscriber on the other end of that email address. And I think when a lot of brands talk about their programs, a a lot of times it's in terms of how many email addresses are, in their database and how many times do they touch them a week or a month. And it's not wrong, right? I mean, it is a metric of how we measure our programs, but it's important to also not lose sight of the fact that there is a person on the other side of that email address who is receiving email from you and other brands alongside yours. And at any moment in time, it could be your email or, a competitor's email or a completely unrelated industry email that puts them over the edge of feeling like it's just too much. So, it's important to consider what the experience for the consumer is in the inbox. So as we looked at, the data and the response from the survey, consumers reported receiving, email from on average about 9 brands. So they admittedly say there are about 9 brands on average that they have given their email address to and are receiving email from. And, they're estimating about 13 messages a month from each of those brands. So that breaks down to about 117 email a month, approximately 4 email a day that they're getting from brands. And, yours could be one of them. The good news is that, more than half, so about 52%, feel like they're getting about the right amount of email from brands. But it's really close. Another 44% feel like it's too much. So, you have to be mindful of, keeping the balance of, what is it that people are saying about your email program? Do they, are they getting too much email from you? Do they stop responding after a certain point or once you reach a certain frequency? And, as we work with clients and as we look at programs, it's important to keep in mind that determining frequency shouldn't be about a blanket statement that says, well, we're going to consistently send, 5 messages a week to our clients. It really should be situational, and you should take into consideration, what are, some of the other engagements that the consumer or the subscriber is having with your brand. As an example, consumers tend to be less sensitive to volume and more responsive to frequent communications around a moment in time where they're highly engaged with the brand. So it could be that they've made an inquiry, they've reached into customer support, they've made a purchase, but a proactive kind of reach into the organization. They tend to be more susceptible to more frequent communications around those times. So again, just something to keep in mind as you're looking at the build of those programs. So again, for the 3rd consecutive year per the survey and likely for many years before and many years to come, consumers still subscribe to receive email for discounts. I wouldn't say that this is a surprise to anybody. It's the reason that most people subscribe for email communications. It's the benefit, the value proposition that they find. But I would remind you all to think about going back to the formation of habit. When we first started sending email as marketers, brands were sending email to deliver information. They were informative. It was newsletters. It was loyalty account statements, things like that. And we really have trained the consumer to expect and to seek discounts via the email channel. But that being said, not all offers are created equal. So what are the right offers to send to consumers, via this channel? So they're expecting them, but what kind of offers make the most sense? So the type of discount that we found was most attractive for everybody surveyed was hands down a $1 off deal. So a lot of brands will test, dollar off versus % off, et cetera. And here we found, regardless of age, regardless of category, regardless of, income makeup, right, the most popular, most well-received offer is a $1 off offer. So that's interesting. And then when we get to the second, the kind of what drives purchase behavior secondarily, or what offers resonate most, we started seeing a discrepancy. So where you see, free shipping and a percentage discount were kind of neck and neck. And so here we really wanted to dive a little deeper to understand, okay, what differences can we see between a free shipping offer and a % off discount? And what we found was that it was largely driven by age. So we did look at, income makeup and other things like that, thinking that, it would make sense that based on an income tier that might, have some sense of an impact on where they kind of fell in response to an offer. But what we really found was that it was age. So looking at, the 18 to 45 customer base, they prefer percent off discounts as their second kind of place. Whereas those, in the older tiers, so 46 to 75, actually prefer free shipping deals. So again, as you look at the demographic of your customer base and understanding what they report as, the offers that tend to resonate, it's a great opportunity to start testing and really see if what the customer says in this situation actually resonates with how they act or how they respond to the offers that you're putting in front of them. All right, next we're going to look at purchase behavior. So, like I said at the beginning of the conversation, we do talk a lot about the revenue generated by email. And, we tie revenue back from an attribution perspective, but what impact does it really have on consumers making a purchase? Right? And so, we wanted to dig a little deeper in, what that impact is. And, what we found was that, over 43% of those surveyed will actually wait for an email discount to come before they make a purchase. And so what this says is that email isn't necessarily the driver of the decision to purchase. It's almost become the coupon in the Sunday paper that they're waiting for to actually go make the purchase. And, it's a little chicken and egg, right? So would they make the purchase otherwise? Maybe, maybe not. So there is, a little bit of testing that you should do here to really kind of determine, is email impacting the decision-making process? And you can do that by, holding out a control group and doing some attribution modeling to really kind of determine what impact other channels are having on the consumer, on the consumer's decisions to purchase. But I found it interesting that, that people are actually truly waiting to get an email before they make a purchase because they want that discount. So understanding the influence that your email programs have over the purchase decision and the behaviors of your subscribers is an important consideration as you look at content planning especially. The other interesting aspect is that the relationship, it's not uncommon to expect this, but the relationship clearly and the ability to communicate continues after the purchase. So if you follow that cycle through, looking at this, we found that about 39% of consumers have posted a product review. And consumers, there's a lot of brands who are hesitant to send an email following a purchase to ask a consumer to post a review. Some don't, have even a mechanism to do it on their website because they're fearful of what people will say. But what we found in kind of going through all of this research is that consumers are nearly 3 times more likely to actually post a review when they're reporting a good experience with a product or service versus a bad one. So, this is a great opportunity to, identify your advocates. Who are the people who are actually going to post a review and it's going to be a positive review? And, really being able to identify those people, flag them inside of your database, and really start to recognize and carry that sentiment through your email program that, you're kind of providing this recognition that they are brand advocates and that it means something, to the business. The other aspect of this was really looking at how, email received on a mobile device have, influenced purchase over the course of the last 12 months. And we're finding that, folks aren't really kind of receiving mobile email on the fly and driving them to an immediate purchase decision. And the majority still don't consider email as a driver of a purchase decision, but, it is increasing in adoption, especially as you look at the adoption of the mobile coupon element. And some of this has to do with the fact that not all brands are equipped to handle mobile coupons in their POS. So, there is an adoption curve that's happening on the brand side as well. But, there is this, kind of increase in customers who are willing to, and want to redeem coupons or discounts, via mobile. So, again, this is, an increasing trend. There's a lot of opportunity here to, really start looking at, RA. Do you have a business that requires, something like this? I mean, if you're a brick and mortar location and you have e-commerce, there's a lot of opportunity there. If you only do e-commerce, clearly this is, less indicative of a need for the business, but definitely, something to consider. Consumers are getting more mobile in the redemption of coupons, and, it's a really good delivery mechanism for them. All right, so as we look at kind of email and mobile, this has been a topic of conversation for probably a couple of years now, and the synergy between the two really is seamless, and the possibilities truly are endless when it comes to what you can do with email in a mobile environment. And I think the one thing that's important to kind of recognize here is that consumers see email as email. And it's our responsibility, and the onus is on us to make sure that experience for them is, a delightful one, regardless of the device that they're on. So they really do see email as a mechanism that should be experienced succinctly and effectively across whatever device they choose to kind of engage with it in. It is, I think part of the challenge too is that it is sometimes difficult for us to look at consumers through anyone's eyes but our own. I think about, in looking at this, right, and kind of cell phone activity, I think about my personal cell phone use, and it doesn't really mirror what's reflected here, right? I mean, I primarily use my phone for business and business calls and business email, and then personal texts and personal email. But, here, I mean, clearly people are still using their phones to make phone calls, which is, kind of expected, but a lot of people are, surprised that phone calls are still happening. But, then sending, receiving texts, browsing the internet, and then receiving personal email are amongst the top 4 or 5 opportunities here. And as we look at this, I mean, it is a consideration that we need to make because there is again, I mean, a lot of people talk about how much email is opened on mobile devices, but you're also competing for attention when somebody has that device in their hand, and so they are presented with endless opportunities of what they can be doing with their mobile device, and their smartphones to bide their time. And so in looking at this, right, it's just important to know that email is about 4th on the list. Still up there, right? 80 some odd percent, 82% are still using, still checking email on their personal email on a smartphone, but they're doing lots of other things too. So you're not just competing for attention in the inbox, you're also competing for attention on the mobile device. And so it's just something to consider, as you do start looking to, plan better for your mobile experience for the customer. But, again, in looking at this for a couple of years running now, if the email doesn't render well on the device, good luck getting them to read it. I mean, only 4% of the recipients are inclined to pinch or expand and drag your email around to read it. So, you have to be mindful of what that experience is. And, if you're not currently designing either responsive or mobile-first templates, and you have an audience of people that kind of fall into that age demographic that, engage with email highly in a mobile environment, you really need to start considering it. But, the one thing that I would say about it too is when you do, much like any consultant ever says, be sure to test it and measure it appropriately. It is not a silver bullet to say, okay, I'm just going to create this responsive design and call it a day. I have worked with a number of clients that we've seen great success in implementing kind of basic best practices in a responsive or a mobile template. I've worked with other clients, and it might have taken us in the area of 6 months of iterations in trying to figure out what works best for their customer base in their mobile environment. So, it's an undertaking, and it's something that you really do have to test into. And I would, kind of go beyond measuring the basics of open and click activity for desktop versus mobile users, but also carry it through to conversion and understand what impact, the new design, the new layout, and the experience are having further downstream. We've worked with a number of clients and we've found some pretty interesting results, on the flip side of that. So, it's just something to make sure you look at, because it can, if you do decide to go to a mobile first, let's say, could have a negative impact on conversion from your desktop subscribers. So, open and click activity might be consistent, but you might find that they're not converting as high a rate as they once were. So, like I said, it's just something to keep in mind and something to test and keep an eye out for. The other thing that we wanted to ask a little bit about here too was the idea of Passbook. So, for those of you not familiar with Passbook, it's an app, keeps things like airline boarding passes or movie tickets, gift cards, coupons, all in one kind of easy, accessible place. It lets you scan your iPhone, check in for a flight, or get into a movie, etc. But we really wanted to understand, are consumers using it? And so, as we surveyed the customer base, adoption and use over, the last 5 months has really been largely concentrated in the 25 to 45-year-old age group. And coupons are the number one stored item as they're reporting. It's the number one stored item that they report keeping in the Passbook. And so this is, again, just kind of a next step or an iterative kind of consideration for your email program, that, since coupons and discounts are really the number one reason that consumers subscribe to receive email, if you're mailing to a demographic that fits in here, you might want to look at a strategy that integrates digital coupons into the Passbook. It's something that could be advantageous to explore. All right, so we're going to look at the last chapter here, and it really is, kind of looking at the intersection of email, text, and kind of social media in this connected world. And so, again, as you think about it, the customer, the consumer, they see your brand as a single brand, right? It doesn't really matter for them how or where they're engaging with you. They see your brand as your brand. And it's important to see the consumer the same way. So regardless of whether they're shopping at your store or on your website or are participating in, your text program, or they, follow you on Twitter, those are all things that, are important, but you can't lose sight of the fact that they're still a single customer. And so, this idea of having a single view of your customer is still an important aspect of managing and dealing with communications across the customer base. So as we looked at this, nearly 60% of the surveyed customers or the consumers don't connect with brands on Facebook. They are not interested in connecting with brands, but when they do, it's because they want deals. So much like email, brands, engaging with brands and subscribing to email programs to get discounts. The consumers that do engage with a brand on Facebook are typically doing so because they want a deal. And, a lot of this is tied to the fact that in a social world, consumers are publicly tied to a brand when, they like them on Facebook or, are following them. And it can either be a badge of honor for them or a halo of shame. And it really kind of depends on how others in their social sphere perceive the brand that they're doing business with. And so, again, in a day and age where you can pretty much find out anything about anybody, largely because of their online behaviors and interactions. Some people are a little skeptical still. Like I said, 60% of those surveyed don't connect with a brand on Facebook, and that's pretty interesting. While they might engage with them, in other ways, they're not connecting with them on Facebook. So where you have, though, identified subscribers that do engage with both your email program and have a social presence, that intersection really kind of leads you to this highly valuable, brand loyal, and likely very evangelical consumer. And again, it's an opportunity for you to treat them a little differently than everybody else in your database. So, while the numbers could potentially be small, and again, based on the age demographic of your customer, or, it could be higher, but there is this opportunity to really identify who are those people and how valuable are they to the business. So again, in looking at text, in a very similar scope, there's still a large portion of consumers that aren't interested in joining text programs either. So just north of 50%, of those that aren't interested, but on the flip side, for those that do, again, to receive discounts. So apparently, the consumer is highly addicted to digital discounts. But, again, like I said, same holds true on the social side as for text, where you have customers or consumers who are engaging in multiple channels with you. These are indicators of highly valuable customers, and you have the opportunity to really treat them, in a different way. So email still remains the primary preferable channel to receive messaging from brands and that the consumers are doing business with. It's personal, right? But it's more private to the consumer. They can share it if they want to, but if they don't want to, they don't have to. And so it does have a bit of anonymity for them as the recipient amongst their social base, and it's not something that they have to promote if they choose not to. So again, that's not to say that there isn't an opportunity for all of these channels to intersect. The data, the insight that can be gathered from all of this can really create a view of the customer that we're lucky to be able to have as digital marketers. So again, as you look at your customers, just something to keep in mind. All right, so as we wrap this up and kind of conclude the preliminary review of the consumer survey results, we just wanted to recap very quickly on what we've kind of seen over the last 3 years of doing this survey. So here, discounts remain the primary reason people subscribe to email lists and clearly to social feeds and to text messages. Consumers, they want discounts. And, again, as digital marketers, we've trained them to do that. Consumers' biggest concern with email marketing, another year running is frequency. So, 44% of respondents reported that they're receiving too much email. So, again, we have to be mindful of how much mail we're sending to these folks and keeping in mind that they're also receiving a lot of email from a lot of other people. Mobile email is more important than ever before. So almost 60% of consumers between 18 and 34 use a smartphone to check their email at the beginning of the day. Only 4.2% of those surveyed say that they will try to read an email on a mobile device even if it doesn't look good. So again, these are things we have to take into consideration around consumer preference and how they're engaging with our email programs. And, as we just said, email really does continue to be the most popular channel for brand communications. And so, let's make sure that we cease the email is dead, kind of communications. It's still very much alive and kicking. Consumers are still very engaged with the channel and are still looking for ways that they can get the most out of, engagements with brands via that channel. All right, so as we wrap this up, again, looking at what do you do with this data, right? And so as we enter into kind of the rest of the series, the goal is really to have some conversations, dive deeper into some of these statistics, really look at what does it mean for you as a brand to take this information, internalize it, and then actually make it actionable in some meaningful way for the business. So, all of these points are, valid points about how consumers are engaging. And as we look to the next few communications ranging from September 9th, I think the last webinar concludes on 11/5. Really looking at how we can help you and partner with you guys to take this information, explore the impact that these perceptions may have on your program, how you as a marketer can address it inside of your programs. We'll provide a look at what others are doing, to address these types of issues and concerns, and then finally action items and takeaways that you'll be able to implement coming away from the series. So with that, I want to thank you all for your time, and we can open it up for some questions.
Great. Thank you, Kara. Let's just dive in for the remaining 15 minutes. The first question, if consumers are subscribing to more than 9 brands' email programs, how do you recommend standing out in the inbox?
Oh, goodness. I mean, there's all kinds of things that, brands really should be considering, and I hate to be the typical consultant that says it depends, but there are a number of factors that really go into that. Some of it has to do with, really truly understanding the value proposition of your brand with the customer, and what value is placed there very specifically. The one thing that I do talk with most of our customers about in finding an opportunity to stand out in the inbox is to really get away from the practice of, using standardized subject lines, things like that are repetitive. So this month's newsletter, things like that tend to get very repetitive inside the inbox. A lot of brands will use that approach for, some of their subject line kind of activity. And a lot of brands really do try to create a bit of a formula, if you will, for their subject lines. And, doing so, really creates kind of this monotony. And so, I always recommend that, in order to stand out in the inbox, there is an opportunity to, bring a little sense of surprise to your subject line every once in a while. If they're typically pretty serious, maybe change it up a little bit and have it be a little more fun. If they tend to be, more static and statement-esque, make it engaging and ask a question. Highlight what it is that's inside of your email communication that could be unique or different that's going to catch their attention. It's subject lines and the subject line strategy that brands use is really, it is one of the first things that a consumer is going to see. It's what they see that helps them determine whether or not they want to open the email communication. And, finding opportunities to leverage that as part of your storytelling, I think, is really important. A lot of people will kind of slap a subject line on an email communication after it's gone through copywriting. They always recommend to consider it as part of your copywriting effort and put as much thought and attention to your subject line as you do to, your offer and your audience and every other aspect of the communication. Great.
In regards to why people sign up to receive promotional emails, do we have any visibility or insight into why those 4.6% of respondents said they don't sign up for emails at all?
You know what? I'll have to dig back through the data. I am not entirely sure. That's a great question, and Julie, we should put that off to the side as a follow-up. We'll definitely look into that.
Okay, will do.
And I would say too, if we didn't ask it this year, it's quite possible that we might not have even asked that question at that level of detail. But if we didn't, it is a great question to ask, and we'll make sure that we do it on the next one.
All right. In regards to frequency and relevancy, my client wants to send the same email out to the same customer list a total of 3 times a month, keeping the content of the email the same, but just changing the subject lines each time because we heard that was effective. Do you think that is effective? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I'm making faces. I don't know. I mean, honestly, I have not seen it work well for a lot of brands. This is one of those things that's extremely dependent on the content and the customer base and a lot of times the source of acquisition. So there are certain situations where it can work well, and it does take a bit of that repetition to get the customer to engage. So I would say that it would make sense to look at a program like that if you can include some logic that says anybody who hasn't received this message and didn't open it and then send it again with a different subject line, and then use the same logic in the tertiary when you get to the third message. There's nothing more frustrating for a customer than to receive an email that they saw. And again, maybe the logic is different. Maybe it's they opened the message but didn't convert, right? And you send it to them again if there's a conversion aspect to it. So I would build some logic around that, but I would also suggest totally testing it. Test it as, a free-for-all, send it to everybody, send it with some logic associated with it, and then, maybe only send it twice. I don't know. I think that's a perfect opportunity to start, doing some testing though, because I do believe that that is a practice that will one of two things. It will either resonate or not with a certain kind of customer. And on the flip side of that, it could wear on the consumer over time. So while it might be effective for the first couple of months that you try it, it is possible that it could start losing its effectiveness, after the customer is getting used to kind of that cadence. So it's just something I would keep an eye on.
Great. Regarding posting reviews, what is the breakdown by age on who does that the most and who does that the least?
So we can. I don't have all the raw data in front of me, but Julie, again, let's make that a follow up, and we can share the answer with everybody that attended, following the webinar.
Got it. Did mobile purchasing statistics change when you looked at the data by the age of the respondents?
So that was what we found, was that the question was the mobile open. Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
Yeah. So, yeah. So yeah, we did find that when we broke it down by age, that the 18 to kind of 34-year-old customer was opening at a much higher rate on a mobile device. So I believe it was nearly 60% open activity happening in that age range. When you got to the next tier, it was about 40%, and then it dropped dramatically, after that. So, there is definitely a correlation between age and, the desire to, or the proclivity to open on a mobile device.
Do you recommend a list cleanse for those who haven't opened an email in the last 90 or 180 days? I'm curious because of the secondary email accounts that may not get viewed as much, but it could still be seen eventually. Yep.
So lots of deliverability people, and probably even some of our account managers hate me when I say this, but no, I don't recommend that it's a blanket purge with inactivity for 90 or 120 days. I think it's situational for sure. I'm a firm believer that, so again, this is very dependent on source. So if the customer subscribed, right, whether they came to your website and subscribed, or they did it via a purchase or a transaction, and they subscribed during that process, they specifically subscribed to receive email from you. Now, mind you, they may not open all the time. They may not click all the time. There are certain aspects that you have to monitor from a deliverability perspective. So if you're not experiencing any deliverability problems and you see inboxing happening, at an acceptable rate, so if you see about 80% of your messaging is being inboxed, I would say I don't see any reason to purge that level of inactivity. There is an opportunity to message to them differently, right? So maybe you don't keep them in the same queue as everybody else. And maybe again, if there's seasonality with your product or engagement, based on number of times a year a customer purchases, there are a number of factors that really kind of go into at what point in time is a customer, when do they meet that definition of being unengaged? So I would say no, I don't agree with it as a blanket statement. I think it is situational. I think there are a number of things that you can look at to take into consideration, at what point in time you make that decision. I always share this example when I talk with brands and customers about purging inactives, and it's just because somebody didn't open or click on an email communication doesn't mean that the email in the inbox didn't have an impression. And so as email marketers, we don't really leverage impression as a metric very often. But it really is. Every time a customer sees your email in the inbox, you've made a brand impression on them. And so the example I always use is, many years ago there was a gentleman I used to travel with for work all the time, and he was an active reader of books on his Kindle. And as we sat in the airport, he gets an email from Amazon. He's checking his phone, and it's like, hey, the subject line is, this book is now available. And he didn't open the message. He didn't click on anything. He picked up his Kindle and he downloaded the book. And he did that because he saw it in his inbox. And so I always encourage brands to, yes, being able to leverage some level of attribution. Pixel tracking conversion is always important. But, you can also look at, did somebody receive an email from you, and in X number of days did they make a purchase, whether they clicked through the email or not. And it can be a good indicator of, what impression impact is having on purchase as well. So it's one of those situations where you don't want to cut off your nose to spite your face. But the one thing that I always warn is to absolutely make sure that you're actively monitoring the deliverability side of it, because when you start experiencing deliverability problems, aged data is one of the things that you have to start looking at purging.
Are you surprised that the recent changes to the inbox, like the Gmail tabs, haven't had more of an impact on engagement?
I don't know. I mean, not really. I think that, and I say that for a couple of reasons. I think part of it is that some people have actually turned it off, where you have the ability to say, I want to present this in the classic way, especially when you start talking about Gmail. I think, again, when you start talking about the habit of things, I always kind of default to my husband and how he engages with email, because he is so not in this industry at all, and I always kind of use him as my litmus test. And I remember when Gmail changed to tabs, and he's got his Gmail account synced through the native app on his iPhone, right, which does not present email in a tabular way. And then he would go into his email on his computer, and he'd get so mad that he couldn't find email, because now all of a sudden he had to start searching through all these tabs to, determine where it was. So I think there's a habitual curve that happens with how consumers choose to engage with things like email. And we have been, engaging with email in a very specific way for very many years, and only recently been trying to augment that behavior. And so, it certainly could over time have some sense of impact. I think the biggest impact is really, for some brands, it's been, maybe a delay of open. So open activity happens, and maybe it happens at day 3 instead of day 2, which is a common thing that I've seen for some brands. But, the bottom line is that we're not really seeing a whole lot of, impact on conversion rates. And, I think that's a market thing, because there was a lot of panic and worry about what, changes to the inbox, presentation we're going to do for brands. That being said, I think that there's probably still a lot coming from, inbox providers, and how there's been some conjecture around, the possibility of, which would be a huge change for brands. And again, conjecture, rumor, not anything that's happening. That's my caveat here. But there has been some rumor around the possibility of delivery inside the inbox, or placement inside the inbox based on your hierarchy, not being time based but being engagement based. So if customer X opens and clicks through on your email more than brand Y, your email will be placed higher in the inbox than others, regardless of what time you sent the message. So I think there are things that could potentially be coming down the pike over the next couple of years that really lean heavily on engagement as a mechanism to not just determine where they place your message via tabular kind of presentation, but really, what the prominence inside the inbox can become. So just something to, I always look at it as engagement as an important factor in everything that you do. And so it's just, there's some possibilities of things happening down the road that could definitely have a bigger impact than what we've seen thus far.
Okay, and just 2 more questions before we wrap up. What are the top 2 to 3 must-have design factors an email marketer would want to have in their mobile-friendly, responsibly designed email?
Oh, boy. Short words. big words, short words, and big buttons. It really should be, the size. Size matters when you're looking at mobile. You want to make sure that your text can be easily seen and is visible, and that you don't have to do a whole lot of expanding to read it. I think that, again, like I said, big buttons is, it's important as well. There is nothing more frustrating, especially if you have links close together inside of the communication, nothing more frustrating than thinking you're clicking on one thing and actually clicking on another because you got, bigger fingers than some others. And like I said, few words. So, again, I kind of liken it to driving past a billboard at 75 miles an hour on the expressway. You want to be able to, again, you're fighting for attention in the mobile environment. You want to grab their attention quickly and make it obvious what you're trying to say.
Great. And our last question, out of all of the survey results from the 2014 survey, what statistics surprised you the most?
I would say I really kind of expected a lot of it. Nothing really kind of caught me off guard. The initial look at the mobile activity, the mobile open activity, kind of surprised me, which is why it was something we dove into a little deeper to kind of determine why that was the case. It certainly didn't align with what we were seeing from a behavioral perspective as we looked at our customers' engagement with mobile. So I would say that one was. And then I think the other is really kind of, the adoption of Passbook. It's something that's been talked about. It's something that, I think marketers would like to see greater adoption of. I think there's a lot of opportunity there for anybody who has, brick and mortar locations that have the ability to, to really kind of, redeem mobile coupons. But I would say those are probably the biggest ones.
Great. Thank you, Kara, and thank you to all attendees for joining us today for the first webinar in Blue Hornet's 2014 Consumer Views of Email Marketing webinar series. If you have any additional questions that we didn't answer in today's webinar or on Blue Hornet in general, please be sure to email us at bluehornetcommunications@bluehornet.com. We'll be sure to send out the recording of this webinar as well as the slides that were presented in the next coming days. And if you still haven't registered for any of the 5 remaining webinars in this series, you can go to resources.bluehornet.com/consumerviews and register today. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great rest of your week.